I think we're live. Hey, folks, welcome to another episode of Let's Talk Common Sense with me, Mike Omani. Thank you for joining us today. If you've been a diligent listener, follower, maybe you watch on YouTube, I'm really grateful. And we are here at Common Sense because it is hard. Let's just put it on the table. It's really hard doing a podcast in the kind of audio revolution. Everyone's doing audio these days, so it's really hard to stand apart. So if you're a committed listener, thank you so much. What's been happening? Last week's been super interesting. Lots of interviews I want to talk about today, but I don't think we have the time for it because just a few days ago, I saw Keir Starmer doing a very interesting interview. I also saw Matt Hancock. I'm calling him Matthew like I'm his dad. Doing a really interesting interview. I could spend the whole podcast talking about just how crazy both interviews were. One, someone admitted to breaking the law. The other one, somebody said the person breaking the law shouldn't face any repercussions. Crazy stuff. But we don't want to focus on that today. Today we want to focus on Black Lives Matter. Now, we are fast approaching the 1-year anniversary of the death of George Floyd. He was murdered, of course, on cold pavement by a police officer, a white police officer, Derek Chauvin, you remember, and two essentially onlookers, as it were, who were also police officers. It's almost been a year, and so I know it's crazy to think about. What I want to talk about today is assess, if you like, how things have changed a year on, right? What's happened? What have we learned, so to speak, and how is the world changing? Remember, it was a kind of world shifting moment. We saw America was engulfed for the most part by protests and all sorts of riots and things of that nature. The UK equally, you remember, Colston statue being toppled, Bristol, lots of unrest in the UK as well. And so, even though I'm someone who obsesses over political moments, I really feel like the George Floyd situation was unique. It was different. We saw bipartisanship, left wing, right wing people going, yeah, this is bad. That never happens, right? So I want to say, did we in the UK keep the energy, as it were, where we are at right now? And yeah, I want you to get involved. So let me know what you think about, the UK a year on from BLM. What's happened? What's going on? Are you happy with the way things are changing? Let me know. The hashtag is LTCS. You can do that on Twitter. Of course, this podcast is brought to you by the Common Sense Network, and you should subscribe or click the follow button thing, whatever it is. Just be a part of the conversation. I'm not going to waste your time. I'm going to bring on a great guest who's going to help me mull over some of these interesting topics. This is kind of like a celebratory episode. Of course, we're not really celebrating anything, fun or great. We are marking a brutal murder, to be quite frank, but I want us to look at the progress we've made and critically assess it. So I'm bringing on a friend of mine, someone I've known for a long time, who I think is going to be good. She's going to help us make sense of all these different things. She's a policy officer. She's a social action youth worker. She represented and managed all sorts of campaigns as a member of NUS for a number of years. And so I think she's uniquely placed, to help us with some of these topics because, Busayo Twins speaks about some of these things all the time. So we've had lots of heated, spirited debates about it. So I think you're in for a treat. So without further ado, here she is.
Do you know what's funny when you said, I hope she'll be good? That's just a disclaimer. Like, I can only vouch for how much I've seen her, but I can't say that every day she'll be good. So that's good. You've separated each other from this conversation already.
No,
it's good. Every man for themselves. It's cool.
No. I did not listen. This is a time of solidarity, so we have to stick together. How are you doing? I have to ask you that question that everyone asks on how's lockdown treating you first and foremost.
Mate, it just feels like it was this what life was, and then I just have this like weird concept of a utopia that I once lived, but it was never true. It's like a storybook. But ultimately, it's been like how it's been for everyone, probably just a bit irritable. No real outlets you can kind of utilize to get the steam off in the week. So Saturday comes by and you're like, feels exactly like yesterday and the day before. Weekends mean nothing really. But at the same time, I'm blessed and I haven't really suffered from any health issues that I'm aware of, and my loved ones have not been affected, and some people haven't got a job, some people, so in that sense, I'm always grateful. So yeah.
No, I try to do the same thing because it's so easy to focus on the bad. And the bad is definitely, it's clear for everyone to see. But we're blessed, man, especially in the West, and being where we are right now. The fact that we've got something like 16 million people who've had the first dose of the vaccine, the fact that we have a vaccine and multiple vaccines, and we can respond pretty in an agile fashion to new strains. We're just blessed. And of course, this podcast comes out Monday, and Monday is when we're meant to hear from Boris Johnson, who's going to be telling us whether, the roadmap out of here. Are you optimistic about Boris's announcement?
I think it's about time we heard from him in that sense. So it's good to be like, okay, so there is a plan to get us out, but at the same time, it's all the broken trust, isn't it, over the handling of the situation. So it's kind of like, okay, we want to update, we want to be able to build the stamina to survive the next couple of months, because there might be a light at the end of the tunnel, but at the same time it's kind of scary. You don't want to have to go back in again. You want to make sure the enjoyment, and the freedom balances with containing the virus and the spread of the virus and stopping us from potentially coming back in autumn in the same situation. Hopefully the vaccine does create a difference and the number of deaths are able to stop, but it's the same anxiety of just being like, we've been here before, haven't we? We've had many roadmaps, and it's a bit like, okay, well, when it comes in it, until he announces, you won't know, because speculation is a big thing in this whole game. So let's hear him say something before we start questioning whether it's a good.
My fingers are crossed because I don't know, like you're weighing up that whole national emergency, keep us all safe thing with my personal desire to leave this kind of set of circumstances I'm in. Personally, I'm always mulling over that. Of course, I've got all sorts of ideas about how we should be doing the rollout and all these kind of political points. But generally speaking, I'm definitely tired of COVID. I was telling a friend just like 2 weeks ago, I think I had my first okay, I've had enough of this type of thing. But one thing you said is so interesting to me, actually, is this nostalgia point, this desire to go back to a time pre-COVID, where I guess because of just how dire things are now, we have this kind of obviously proclivity to think about the past as through these kind of rose-tinted lenses, as but let's not forget, it was March the 4th last year that the man was killed, and the police officer kind of stood on his neck, on his knee, for, was it 7 minutes 30 seconds, something like that. It was shocking. I mean, for me, it's equally shocking to consider how long it's been. When you look at the UK, because let's just jump into it. When you look at the UK, you look at that period. Remember all the marches. People didn't really care about COVID anymore. How do you think we've progressed since then?
Boy, I think in terms of consciousness-wise, and it just meaning it being on the periphery, being in some sort of focus in the mainstream's consciousness, in that sense, I think there's been a progress, because at least you don't have to go very far to know that someone's aware of what's happening in the world. Before, it's kind of like the corners of your internet or certain groups that you're around that you'll get that political discourse or social discourse. But now it's like the average person who you might not really engage with, you kind of know they know what happened last year. So that's something to start the conversation off. So that's good in that sense. But ultimately, the places where these things manifested the most was when people were in contact with each other. And we haven't been in contact with each other. And we're not there when, let's say, quote unquote, like white people, for example, have been the recipients of kind of the lessons and the education, mostly. We haven't been with them through their learning process. We just hope that through the screens that they've managed to understand what we've been saying. So there's no proof that any of this has actually translated in the way that we want it to translate. So until lockdown comes to an end and we're back in the offices where we can get those microaggressions, where we can maybe interaction with the police in certain ways, we won't know whether actually, have you actually learned what we said? So it's almost a kind of like, damn, I wish it happened. I know it happened more so because we were in lockdown and everyone was with their screens. But at the same time, I wish it didn't happen then, because now it's kind of like they've got time to buy to make us feel like things have changed. But really, we don't know, because I haven't seen you yet. I haven't seen my white colleagues in person. So how would I know? Like, how would I know? Have you changed your ideas? So.
No, it's crazy. This is why I love speaking to you, because I hadn't considered that perspective, which was that I haven't spent time with you properly yet for me to know if you're still racist.
So their tweets can misguide you thinking, yo, we did it. We did it, yo.
We did it, Joe.
We did it. And you come back and they're still saying, whose food is this in the office? And you're like, damn, we back.
This is so true. You know, it's a double-edged sword. Like you said, the fact that we were in lockdown, I think, contributed a great deal to why it was such a global moment. But at the same time, yeah, you're right. We don't know if things have changed. It was really interesting to me during that time. You know, I wrote a number of articles that day, that month. You know, I hate to say it, but I was booked because I just remember writing. And one thing I wrote about that was really, you know, that I felt really strongly about was kind of performative allyship, right? And you remember those scenes, and maybe there were some well-meaning people who did it, but when I saw white people on their knees, like, "We're sorry," I was like, God, like,
yes, cringe.
There's a place for stuff like that, maybe.
Yeah.
But I just remember feeling like I hope this translates into action, because in the UK particularly, I think one of the things that's very interesting about the UK, and the reason why, you know, I think the UK was so successful, you know, in its imperial, you know, aims and conquest, was there's a set of institutions in the UK that have coalesced over time and are so endemic, and they're so, you know, fused in. I mean, it's so deep that to think that you can just kind of change an institution in the UK is thinking. I mean, here we are trying to change the British media press, and we know the kind of that. So, are you optimistic? And I should probably ask, were you optimistic when you saw, you know, what happened, you know, March the 4th? Are you still optimistic now? And even though we haven't, you know, had close contact, as you've been saying, are you optimistic that when you go back, and when we are back in, you know, non-social distancing, things would have changed?
Do you know what? Ultimately, I am not optimistic because of the things I've said before about, like, what you kind of said about the time it takes to, quote unquote, unracify someone. I don't know what the word would be, but do the things that have been done for them.
I don't know.
I mean, like, it takes a long time for someone to learn what they learn and then to unlearn that, and for you to provide all the scenarios for them to be able to really test if they've learned it as well. Because a lot of racism isn't necessarily even performed racism. You can't really change if someone actually doesn't like you because you're black. Like, that's different to them stopping you from getting an opportunity. So there's many different ways it manifests, and ultimately, not just because of the difficulty in the process, but the demands that we're making, they're not clear necessarily. It's not really, there's no like chair of black people where it's like, what are the aims and what do you want and how do you want them? So I think some of the conversations that make it difficult is because we're upset that white people are doing X, Y, Z, but when we look back and it's only us talking, we don't agree, or we don't even know what we mean by certain things. So it's difficult then to say, change, but hold on, give us 10 minutes. We'll tell you how to change. That's what I think the process is, which is good. You have to do something, but in terms of actually transforming things, I don't know. We've got COVID as well, which is not just the lockdown, but the actual, the pandemic itself in terms of the health outcomes, right? The same demographic that was talking about George Floyd is the same one that has been overly exposed or disproportionately affected by COVID. So you've got, just in terms of those health outcomes, and how can we make sure that we're now not starting from an equal level playing field than we were when we started. We're now so much more behind because economically, socially, all this stuff, we're now behind. So it's like, we might even just be trying to get us to back where we were in 2019. And we weren't happy, but we're so much further back that what transformation might even look like us looking the same, if you know what I'm saying. So it's kind of awkward to kind of quantify and kind of see actually what do we mean by change and how and all that stuff, if that makes sense. Yeah.
No, it does. I think about, you know, the Bloomberg released a few days ago that the UK economy last year shrunk by 9.8% thereabouts. In fact, the size of the UK economy now is the same size it was in 2013. So that's what COVID did to that. And I think you're definitely right in that COVID, in a similar way, has probably set back race relations, you know, or even, you know, black people being overrepresented in frontline services, you know, black people more likely to face discrimination even in health professions, in the health industry. All those different things, again, they compound on each other, which means us moving forward might actually be, you know, us being in where we were in 2018 or something like that because of COVID. One thing that was interesting to me and about what you said is, I remember, again, it was on another show I was on, and we're talking about, you know, George Floyd. I think this one was with Adrian Childs when he was like, "Well, what did the protesters want?" Kind of thing. Like, what? Everyone wants different things. And I thought, well, that's a protest. Like a protest. I don't know why we have to be coherent. I didn't like that when people were saying, "Well, black people, they should decide what they want." It's like, well, hold on. You're at a protest, emoting, expressing your frustration. What's this high bar on everyone being concerned? I'm like, no protest in the world, is like that. People come to the protest for all sorts of different reasons. However, where you're absolutely right, and where I see where you're coming from is, I guess the idea we had was that all that anger would mature, and in some way it would now become a set of policy prescriptions, blah 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 blah. Now let's talk about Black Lives Matter, because they were meant to be kind of, all right, everyone's angry. Remember, everyone's putting black card on their bio. Go and give them money. Go and give them money. Go and give them money, right? And for the most part, a lot of people, they raised over £1 million, I believe, maybe more. And they're meant to be the ones that will take all that anger, turn it into money, and then actually fund and do things, whatever. How would you rate how Black Lives Matter UK have done so far?
I mean, I know that I haven't really followed them as an organization, because it's I guess it's reflective of my politics as well. Like my hope wasn't in an organization to do this job, therefore I wasn't going to follow what they were doing, and not because they're not doing good, but I didn't donate to the cause or anything like that, so I didn't need to follow where my investment had gone in that sense. However, the biggest thing I think that has been a bit of a concern is obviously the transparency in the finances, and people feeling that they are owed to know where exactly it's going, even though when they donated, they weren't told that that there was a clear path forward. But other than that, I'm not going to lie, I think these things happen all the time. But because the causes that we donate to have a more tailored, streamlined recipient, it's easier to be like, okay, cool. When you donate to fires, you don't ask, okay, so which fires, which acre of wood are you donating to? And you just say, I'm donating to fires, because you assume that it's in that particular area, and those who are experts will take over it. But with this one, because the conversation is more democratized, if you feel like you have an interest in it, you will partake in that conversation. You will then decide, actually, this is where I want it to go, or this is that. So ultimately, I'm not really shocked. I don't really have any feelings towards it, apart from just the technical things of it would be nice to see transparency. But at the same time, it's not after you give money, you ask for transparency. Is my ultimate confusion. It would have been before you give them money, you may be able to ask these things.
Yeah. Oh, no, definitely. I think that there's a massive part here in, again, I wrote another piece on this during the time, was people giving money to absolve themselves of like moral guilt. And, I think what I was saying was that's great. But unfortunately, in that exchange, the primary thing of concern to you is your guilt, rather than a change of circumstances for people, like bodies, so to speak, right? So if you're like, oh, I'm so sorry about black people, £100 to this random organization or this random group, that for me, unfortunately, centralizes your guilt as opposed to the people whose life you're trying to make materially better. So you're right. There's a lesson here for people who are just feeling like they need to give some money or post a black square.
But I think it's important to remember in that process as well, we look at white people as only the people who are recipients of the education. In terms of investment, obviously they probably unproportionately donated the most, but black people donated to that. So this conversation isn't even about, I think, the absolving from guilt. Yeah, everyone has that, wants to do that. But technically, it's a conversation for the black community to be like, actually, why was there such a knee-jerk reaction to donate to there? Because that's not a white person's problem, because we just said donate. We never told them to be critical about the process. So for me, whether they're doing white guilt or not, that's what you wanted. There was no ever a process of anyone telling you, do you know what I mean? How were you going to, that's not their problem. They're looking at it like, there's a problem that you think I'm involved in, I'm going to donate to that. And I'm sure you have the answers. We're just upset now that we didn't have the answers. And the person that was taking the money from black people as well, because black people donated, now all of a sudden we're like, oh, where's it going? I'm a bit like, be careful, because it's about race. We get away with a lot of things like this, but be careful how we spin this conversation.
Well, this is what's interesting, because like you, I didn't really follow UK Black Lives Matter. I've never, I think for a lot of people, when they went on the Black Lives Matter website and read their policy prescriptions, I think that's when a lot of people, at least a conservative, black people, black older people are very conservative socially. So when someone said destabilize a black family, I have aunties that said, I can't be a part of this kind of thing. So a lot of people
Right.
withdrew, I think, based on that. However, as of recent, UK Black Lives Matter just published, I believe it was Huffington Post, they published the list of people that were getting their first wave of grants, and they put a list up and stuff like that. And me being the curious cat I am, I've said it multiple times that I like to, around 10 p.m., I like to just go into Clubhouse, which is a new app, and I'll just join random rooms that I should not be in. Just random rooms. I join all sorts. Oh, I see a community of Black women talking about a weave. I'll just join and just listen in. I love it because it helps my curiosity. I love learning random stuff. So I joined yesterday and I saw all sorts of people talking. And one of the issues that I think had come up was people wanting transparency, perhaps, or people actually being angry, I should probably just say it, about the people that Black Lives Matter were given money to. Okay. Because some were saying that the people that were given money to maybe Black-led and stuff like that, but they don't help exclusively Black people. They also help other races and stuff like that. So the question, I guess, is, now I don't want to go too much into BLM, UK BLM's dealings. I haven't investigated it thoroughly, but generally speaking, if that was the case, is there a problem in that? What I'm trying to extrapolate here is it possible to have Black liberation without the liberation of other people who may be connected and maybe around and stuff like that? Should we have these exclusively quote unquote Black funds that only go to Black founded, Black owned, and exclusively Black serving organizations?
Well, it just depends again on what your politics is and what you believe the issue to be that requires a Black person to be the sole recipient of whichever thing that you think they're getting. It's difficult. In reality, it's very difficult to actually see where one person's struggle ends and another one's begins, where they don't overlap and where they're just similar, where you can distinguish them. So the difficult with like policy stuff and all this stuff is that realistically, when you're addressing systemic issues, it's really never ever just about race. Like, race translates itself economically, socially, politically, which means that if you do help a particular group, you will most likely to help other groups as well. That's why the idea of, even though we all hate the name like BAME and stuff, means that the reason why it's good to help Black people if you suffer the most in a particular group is because by default, you're going to lift everyone up to some degree. So for me, I think it's quite naive of us to believe there will be a time where we need to help only Black people. And if your politics is only helping Black people, then you have to question, is it because Black people are the most in need in this, or I don't want other people to benefit from good deeds? It's kind of a weird thing to kind of figure out that if I could help a lot of people, but by focusing on my Black people, why does that upset me? I don't know. I haven't seen the debates online, so I can't really tell what the arguments are, but I think it's just about people being distrusting that the less explicit you are about the Black people you help, the easier it is a way to turn your face away from Black people. It's very easy to be like, oh, if they're not Black, but they're like Black and brown, then before you know it, the Black part, disappears, and you end up being you only help one person and it's funds for Black people. That's the kind of fear and distrust I understand, and that's why it's very important that you look at the mission statement of what people are doing, and why they've chosen the people they have. But also, you have to understand, as a consumer, someone who donates, are you in the best place to even understand what you're donating to? Maybe we've been naive about our experiences as well and been like, you know what, we do suffer disproportionately, but we're not exclusively. And that's what we need to understand. Is it exclusively or is it disproportionately? And
that's such a good point. That's a really good point, especially on the first, like what you said first, for me resonates like a lot, because I think if I tried to put, because I literally just listened to this debate for a good 30 minutes, and if I could put all the arguments into different boxes, there was definitely one that I could earnestly feel that some people were just a bit skeptical and distrustful of the process, because that's what often happens when you dilute things. You start with BAME, and that unfortunately the erasure of Black people's actual problems. Once you lump other groups that represent more people, so we become a minority within a minority within a minority, which makes it harder for us to get some potent change. So that was there on the table, yes.
Yeah.
But there were also another class of arguments that were saying, well, why is it always the Black community that has to quote unquote capitulate, share, help everybody else? Why is it? Why can't we, quote unquote, or why can't there just be a Black thing that's for Black people, and that's it? and nobody else gets it, especially when it's come off the back of the death of a black man, not a black and Asian man or a Bay man or a black man?
I think that's a very good question. That's a very good question, because ultimately, even if your intentions are good and it ends up being you have to kind of broaden the sphere to other people, it very much is a good question to be like, actually, hold on, why is it not just us? You know, especially when it wasn't the death of us that made Black Lives Matter protest. It was the death of George Floyd, who was a black man. So I don't understand why you would be eating off of a protest that, you know, was about us. However, we can't just look at it in terms of who was murdered and then where the recipients go. We have to look at it in terms of bringing about change, who was involved in that change. And it wasn't just the black community. It wasn't just George Floyd that we're campaigning on behalf of. It wasn't just us that are suffering these issues. So I think your proximity to your community will mean that you understand more about what your community is going through. That doesn't mean that in someone else's community, they're not also be like, bro, this is also about me. So we have to have that honest conversation about, actually, to what degree have I just assumed that you guys don't go through the same as me? To what degree did those people maybe in Tower Hamlets go, you know what, stop and search here is only us Asians? Like, you will never see that, to a degree, right? Or whatever pockets of society they live in, they might say, well, when I was growing up, I only saw these people being stopped and searched, etc.
Yeah.
So I think it's about people looking too much into the individual that was murdered, rather than how we brought about change was through many people bringing their voice together. And ultimately, is it possible to alleviate the lives of black people in isolation of the kind of other groups that they share oppression with? How would that work? We go to the same schools as these people. We live in the same council estates as these people. We pay the same tax as certain people. So how do we distinguish ourselves from that? And that's a job for us to decide and do. And we don't need to have one. There will be places where it's only strictly black people by virtue of criteria. That's fine. But does that mean everyone we do should only be black people? That's a question for us to decide. And that's what we need to remember. Like, it's how can we help black people? And there's going to be many different ways to do that. And some people are going to be more militant with their approach.
No, definitely. I'm curious to work out how this plays out in your work, especially on the policy level, because you know, I was founded, we haven't launched yet because of COVID, something called the BAM project, which is basically BAM stands for Becoming a Man. And it's this project where we wanted to go into. So the initial idea was, I remember being young and being in school and being black and being like in primary school and secondary school. Honestly, when I was in year 7, if you asked me what success looked like as a black man, hand on my heart, I would have pointed to a sports person or probably like a rapper. And that's the band that's the variant was in my head. It was as I grew up that I started learning that there were some other black people in other areas. Let me go, wow. So what we wanted to do when we came together was, okay, cool, let's go into schools through workshop discussions, all these different things. Let's help young black boys reimagine, you know, what masculinity might mean beyond the two pictures that flood the headlines. This is something we all understand. And I spoke to one of my cousins about it. My younger kind of in that cousins, but you know what I mean. We're black, we're all related. And I asked him, I said, you know, what do you think about this idea? Blah, 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 blah. And then he asked, can his friend come along? Right? His friend didn't have a black sounding name. So when I asked about his friend, he said his friend is white. And then in my head, it wasn't this deep, but it was when I was thinking about it after. When he said, can he come? In my head, I thought, well, no, instinctively. But then I thought, this is the young guy who's like in year 8, doesn't see the difference yet between him and his friend. He literally doesn't see it. So through this project, I would be introducing him to the differences between him and his friend, saying your friend can't come, even though you're from the same school, you're both on these school meals, you're both on. Even though that's the case, he can't come. He can't be a part of the project. Then I thought to myself, do I want to be the one introducing him to that for the first time? It's meant to be solving the problem. And honestly, it just made me start thinking. So we changed. Then we started thinking, okay, maybe we should be talking about, you know, boys that have been excluded. Then we were thinking about class. And I was like, oh my gosh, I actually get why saying, oh, black boys only. It's just quite naive. And I think failure to engage with it at a deep level. So in your work, when you're doing policy work or advocacy, whatever it is, have you ever had that kind of moral, how do I do this? And you know, when you're writing policy, how do you ensure like all these nuances and kinks are included in the work you're doing? I feel like I'm asking the hard questions tonight, boy.
No, but it's good. No, it's good because these are the questions that this is the gate we always get to after we do our protest and outrage. It's this question that we need to start answering. So it's like, okay, otherwise we get to the front door and we go home. And then it's like next year we do the same thing. So it's important. But these are like the everyday struggles when you work with this particular communities in general, oppressed communities, is because when there's a difference between when you have lived experiences, you are the expert of your own experiences, and you feel those views are very valid. But when you have, and the difference in your role is that when you now when you hold yourself to account, we have a responsibility now. You want to do the best thing possible for what you see in front of you, and that requires you to use the data, to look at what resources are available, and think about in a world where there isn't infinite resources, how best can I make this one thing go quite far? And you have to decide which system or which issue is going to produce the outcome that you think is best. And sometimes it is race specific. Sometimes it's like, you know what, if it's about maybe Black boys and being going to prison, that one's like, you know what, specifically this demographic, I feel like in and of itself, it's enough to talk about it. But when you kind of broaden it out now, talk about becoming a man, or maybe some of the specific experiences, you realize it's not exclusive to the Black community. But when you put all the issues the Black community go together, this is why we feel like we're at the bottom of the totem pole, because it's like it's not just this situation, is it? It's like 20 situations. So you doing this for for the boys, they will also need to go to several other classes to make sure their Black experience is catered for. But through one channel alone, it wouldn't fulfill all the needs that they have, if that making sense. So I think that's why the dilemma comes. So when people see, right, okay, cool, and a lot of these, how you articulate this. So where the ideology separates people is some people are talking about anti-Blackness, and some people are talking about anti-racism. And so people always assume when you go stop being racist, you're not saying stop being anti-Black specifically. You're saying stop discriminating on the basis of race generally. And so when it comes time to build the institutions, you start thinking, yeah, I'm not against just Black people being upset, everyone. And that's when you become more open to XYZ. But sometimes it's a case of, no, specifically you're targeting me. And I think when we talk about anti-racism, and I think that's why Black Lives Matter UK has the approach they have, because a lot of the things I've seen is anti-racism or anti-imperialism. And it's not necessarily anti-Blackness. And if it was anti-Blackness, then they would know who to work with and it wouldn't be confusing. But we sometimes associate racism purely with the Black community. And that's why we get confused at what we see.
Oh, so good.
If it answers your question.
I think that is it is that nuance that, I mean, I was even telling, I called a friend after the debate. I didn't stay for the whole thing, but I called him halfway through the debate to tell him, you know, that it's just, you know, being involved in governance and at board level and stuff like that, you start to realize that being outside and campaigning and trying to make decisions are totally two different things. Case in point, giving back, rebates for tuition fees. So I was talking about rebates for tuition fees for a long time. I was saying we need to give tuition fees because obviously the students aren't experiencing, you know, the university experience that was promised to them. So they should be getting some tuition fee back. And that sounded fair because it's a lot of BME communities that are struggling, and they could do with like a rebate or whatever. And then obviously, you know, I'm part of a governance board for a university, and we're talking about some of these things in detail. And a guy comes in and just gives some stats and facts, as you're saying. So he gave a percentage, you know, I can't remember the percentage, but something like 60% of kids, students, don't actually pay back their tuition fees. It gets written off. I said, interesting. So he said, and obviously we need tuition fees to actually still run the university, a lot of extra services, mental health care, whatever. So if we gave tuition fees back, quote unquote, for a year, or we gave them a percentage, the only people who would benefit are the people who end up paying back less, who are the high earning students that after they graduate will end up earning a lot anyways. And who would lose out are the people who right now don't have access to the extra services we're putting on, which guess what, are BME communities. So in an odd way, if we gave back that you know, the 5K of the tuition fees that we're saying would help people right now, long term it only benefits those who are most privileged.
Right.
And I thought I didn't I never thought about it that way. I just thought you give it back, they have more
Mm.
money, end of story. But I didn't think about all the things surrounding it. And here's the thing, though. A lot of people who are campaigning on the outside, I don't think are interested in that level of kind of complexity or the nuance or even the numbers. It's just, this is what we want, give it to us, and that's the end. And that's why I felt the discussion was a bit interesting, because even as you said, extrapolating if you're saying something is systemic, then naturally systems displace everybody, or negative systems, corrupt systems, systems that tilt towards tyranny, they clearly displace everybody. So the question is, how do we change the system? And by virtue of changing the system, it means a lot of people who are displaced at the bottom, there's no way it's going to just randomly only black people get
black, exactly.
Working class, like everyone gets it, right? So essentially, I'm in agreement with everything you're saying. What I think would be great to get your thoughts on is obviously the UK. I want this to be UK specific, because the UK is it's a very interesting place when it comes to these issues.
Yeah.
And you said at the start that you weren't feeling too optimistic about whether things would actually change and stuff like that. I guess my question to you is, like, supposing there are black people listening, and there are white people listening, how do we kind of keep that energy such that social justice wasn't the kind of, the mood of 2020? It was like, that was the year of justice.
Yeah, that was the year.
But let's move on now. How do we actually, in our day-to-day, as you're saying, not trust in organizations to save us and have that kind of hero complex, but really think about, our day-to-day? What do we do, Busayo?
Well, I have all the answers, so just stay in tune. I'm joking. I really don't. Like, honestly, if I did, I'd be a very rich woman. I would have solved my ideas. Advisor. Trust me. But I think ultimately it goes down to the basics, isn't it? It's you have to think about, like, the distinction between, do you think it's bad or does it repulse you? Is it something that you're disgusted by? If racism doesn't upset you, it's never going to make you change your ways too much. Sometimes you're just not around it for enough for you to be racist, and then it's not because you're not racist, just that I've never been hyper exposed to certain groups. So you're just thinking, oh, I'm cool, So I think it's, first of all, it starts from the heart, isn't it? It starts from you going, actually, I don't think as a human being, this is what I think the world should look like. If you have that type of conviction, it'd be very difficult for you not to manifest in your actions, in your day-to-day. You wouldn't ask people certain questions or do certain things, because you'd be like, no, well, this black family, you'll be more aware, so you'll be able to act accordingly. But yeah, it starts from that. But then also being specifying, like articulating what it is that you want to change and what you want to see. So when we say white people don't support racist, sometimes, especially when it comes to organizations, in what ways? Be specific. Like, let's be specific now. Let's feed it to them, because these organizations, they rely a lot on legality. They like, oh, what is it in our strategic report? It's not in there, so we can. No. We need to articulate it. If you want more black people in your schools, then say, I want more black people in your schools. Don't hide behind BAME. That's not what we're doing. It could be your BAME project. That's fine. But in your BAME project, specify the different groups and say, but black people, this, Asian people, because that's what has to happen. And I think that's where the fear is, and that's why I agree. So ultimately, it's just about being convicted, but also exposing yourself to the communities that you talk about. Everyone, both black people and the non-black people as well. Like, black people, step outside your experiences as well and look at it from okay, I lived in this area, or I have this particular experience, but the UK, if when I open my eyes, all these groups are also suffering. Well, we might as well link up and do this together. Or it might be a case of going, after seeing all of that, black people are still disproportionately affected and I still want to do X, Y, Z. That's fine. But you have to come from a place of perspective. You have to be able to see it. And I think a lot of people are just talking out of their experience, which is valid, but is it the truth though? Is this the picture we're working with? So those are the kind of things I'll just say people should do, be convicted in why you don't like why you're against racism, and expose yourself to that community as well a lot more. Stop doing this whole, I know we're in like this academization of politics where everyone's a subject. You can talk about communities as subjects, as like lab rats, and it's like, oh my gosh, yeah, I read this. No, sometimes have you seen this group before? Even as black people, do you work with people who are at risk of youth violence? Yeah. Do you even help the elderly, or have you ever donated to a food bank? But because you don't know how it works, that's why you just assume that there's unlimited food there and people are eating. Did you not know that they actually need you to donate it's all that kind of naivety that everyone's responsible for. And if everyone was so upset, it just goes to show that if one organization raises £1 million, we're literally fighting over crumbs. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, a single person earns £1 million every day. There are people in this world who's been planned to their income, and we're crying as a group of people. So you have to understand just the desperation and the pain that if we are able to raise money, we do want to know where it comes from. And it's that, and I get why there's hyper scrutiny, and I think it's well received, but that doesn't take away from the fact that these are the statistics. This is where the world is headed, and it's not just us. But sometimes in your oppression, you can feel very lonely, especially when you feel like the people that we're sharing it with, you might not hear them a lot when you're on the ground campaigning. You might be like, you know what, when we were fighting for this, I didn't see none of your faces, but somehow you get the fruit of our labor. And it gets like that. And it's a conversation that needs to be had, especially if we definitely know white people sometimes can't distinguish between anti-racism and anti-blackness. It's for us as people to be like, for them to also be like, no, this is reserved for black people, you know? Because not just for us to make decisions, but it's also for us to go, it's also only reserved for us, or no, we want to share it in this arena, maybe in education, let's share. When it comes to the health outcomes of black women who are giving birth, this is for black women specifically. Or if it's for a counselor, do you know what I mean? There's a way you can identify. I always say it's one battle, but many different frontiers. And you have to accept it's going to look different in certain ways, and some things might not look right now, but there's a bigger vision ahead. If we do this now, then we get to a position where we're privileged enough to do X, Y, Z, and that's why it's the long game.
This is so good. If you're listening to this, maybe you're on your way to work, and I know your neck is hurting because you're just nodding and nodding because this is so true. And what a way, I think, to start thinking about that 1 year anniversary. It's not something we want to celebrate at all, but that's the thing we said, didn't we? We said that that this was a moment in a trajectory. Like this is not. It wasn't a moment. Everyone kept on speaking about how last year was this moment, and we've seen that movie before, where for a few minutes, as it were, everyone focuses on one thing. There's global pressure on it, and then that it just disappears, and then it dissipates, and before you know it. It's not nostalgic. Oh, that 2020, the year of justice, and you go, no, we have to keep going. And I think a key point that I want to just buttress is this idea, and people said it in these phrases. It's not enough to not be racist. You have to be anti-racist, right? But I would add on to that and say that, okay, cool, that's great, and that you can feel anti-racist. It can be a virtue that you hold on to, a maxim you live by, blah 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 blah. But I think beyond that, as you've said, you have to actively work to dismantle. Like you have to dismantle pathologies of thinking, modes of behavior in organizations. There's a lot of messy work that's needed, and it's not going to be done by prim and proper folks, around corporate tables. It's going to be done. It's going to be done. At the bus stop, at the tube station, so on and so forth. So yeah, no, this was a great conversation. I really hope people listening enjoyed it. I hope we have a lot more of this. I know we're planning some stuff in the background, so hopefully, people get to see and hear your voice a lot more, because I just think you've spoken absolute sense. To be honest, I'll be honest with you.
Thank you so much, man. The disclaimer wasn't needed, but I think I did all right.
No, you know what? No, you did all right. You did all right.
Yeah.
And folks, I want to invite you to subscribe, to follow. I'm so bad at promo, but I believe we have a. I feel like an uncle. I think we have a page on Instagram. No, I believe it's LTCS podcast. So do that, and I want to engage with listeners more. I mean, we look at the stats. We're seeing hundreds. We're seeing all these different things, and I'm like, can they message me? I would love to have a chat with them. So if you're one of the listeners, and I know you exist because I look at the stats. Please message me. Use the hashtag LTCS. I want to know what you think. And anyways, I hope you have a great week. I hope Boris has a good thing to tell us. We'll be waiting with bated breath for it. But what are you looking forward to this week, Busayo?
This week, just getting into the swing of work. Like, just sometimes when you have a good routine, you feel refreshed. You feel like I've done something with my day, I've done something with my life, and now I can resume my bed. We go again. It's that same cycle. So hopefully that, but also early this week, the weather was feeling kind of nice. So I'm hoping that.
See some in a minute.
Yeah, I didn't even need to wear a jacket. I was thinking, right, I had the gloves. I was thinking, right, I'm on the beach. You know what I mean? Any small temperature above 2 degrees here, I'm bare like.
People lose their mind.
Honestly,
you're like, bro.
Honestly, do you know what I mean? So hopefully. If we do have to endure lockdown, it's kind of like how it was a bit towards the beginning of last year, where the weather was nice, you can go outside, and so that hopefully that's what I'm looking forward to. And the serotonin.
Fingers crossed. I bought some vitamin D because apparently I'm getting none, so I've had to buy some supplements. But anyways, enough of my personal life, folks. See you in the next one. Thank you again, Busayo.